Hey there, welcome to Charting Toward Intimacy, where we're expanding the natural family planning conversation. I'm your host, Ellen Holloway. All right, we are welcoming Jonathan and Klarissa Chichioco to the podcast. Thanks so much for being here, guys.
Thank you for having us.
All right, we are talking like honeymoon sex today. That's basically the topic of this episode. And we're gonna be jumping in talking about what do you do when you have to abstain on your wedding night? Can you actually plan your wedding around your cycle? How do you talk to your spouse, your future spouse, about things like this? So we're gonna chat on all of those kind of things. But before we jump into those questions, could you guys just tell us a little bit about your story?
Yeah. So, Clarissa.
So we have been married 6 years.
Yeah.
We got married in 2015 and we had our first child, a daughter, in 2018. So 3 years later, we now have a 10-month-old son. And yeah, that's our family life right now. We're living in Santa Clara, and I work as the youth ministry coordinator at Queen of Apostles here in San Jose, and Jonathan is a software engineer. So we're just doing our best, living as a Catholic family, practicing NFP. We use the Creighton model.
Well, yeah. I think you missed the fact that we met in 2010, so we were friends. Going backwards now, but yeah, we met in 2010. And then we started dating in 2012. So what was that, 2 years before we got engaged? Yeah. And then so it was like a little less than a year of engagement. So yeah, I guess that's tip number one, is don't make the engagement for too long.
Oh, that's a really good tip. Yeah. Don't be like, oh, we're going to do like a 2-year engagement. Then that is going to get even harder as you get closer and closer.
That's a recipe for disaster, for sure.
Yes.
I mean, no offense to anybody that has long engagements. If you can do it, more power to you. But if you're anything like us, 2 years would have been madness for us. So if you can stomach it, then more power to you.
Yeah, my engagement was like a little bit more than a year, and that was very frustrating. It was like, why did we do this?
I think we were who was the couple that we spoke to?
Bobby
Angel.
Jackie Angel.
Yeah. So I remember Bobby talking to me about an engagement. He's like, just remember, there's always a light at the end of this really long tunnel. Okay, it's there. Don't just keep going. So that always stuck in. That was the image that always stuck in my mind during our engagement.
Oh man. And speaking of that very long tunnel, all right, so you've got this long tunnel, you're abstaining until marriage. You're practicing chastity outside of marriage by not having sex together. And then you start, kind of counting the days ahead, and you're realizing, and you're charting, and you're looking at your chart, and you're saying, oh, I am probably going to be in my fertile time right when we get married, or like probably right about when we leave for our honeymoon. What in the world do I do?
I think what was it, maybe like the week of, or maybe something like that. Klarissa had, we were just talking about wedding stuff, and she's like, yeah, so I've been charting and it looks like I'm gonna be fertile like on the the day of our wedding night. And for me at that point, you might as well have told me like the venue canceled on us. That's how big of a bomb that was for me at the moment. I think there's on my mind, so I think any little problem seemed like a bigger problem. But I think we eventually just were like, okay, well, we'll just see how things go.
Well, I think we have to also say why we felt that way. And it was because we had committed to taking about 12 people to World Youth Day in 2016. So
we didn't want to be
we didn't want to bring a
and
baby or be pregnant,
traveling internationally and all
Yeah.
that stuff. So there was a practical, reason for us to avoid pregnancy.
Because of that commitment.
Because of that,
Right.
and for a lot of couples, there are going to be a lot of reasons for this too. I think a lot of people will say, "Oh, we're not ready," or but for us, it's like, when are you really ready? You
True.
you can always say, "Oh, I'm not ready," or "I don't have this," or "I don't have that." But from time to time, there are like logistical reasons why you should, a couple would want to avoid, right?
Right. And we've talked about that on the podcast quite a bit, of just like that discernment is difficult. It's sometimes hard to figure out, is it, permissible for us to try to space pregnancy right now? Is this what we should be doing, or should we be open to a pregnancy or another pregnancy? And those again are things that you should be talking to with your future spouse about. If you're engaged right now, and you're just like assuming, oh yeah, we're going to try to avoid for like the first year, and you haven't talked to your future spouse about that, you probably should sit down and chat about that. And then maybe also chat about the possibility of you being fertile on your wedding night too.
Yeah. I think, what kind of calmed us down was like, okay, there's a lot of, I think like there's a lot of like external things, that kind of influence you to feel a certain way. It's like, well, one, like, media and, what we've seen on TV, it's like all about the wedding night and it's all about the honeymoon. Like, this is the time, but then you think about it, it's like, well, you have like a whole lifetime, to do that. Right. And so, I think that's what kind of helped us, is like, okay, like if it doesn't happen, on this specific day or this specific week, then, that's not the biggest deal in the world. There are bigger problems than that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there are ways to show love to one another and to be intimate with one another too.
Yeah. That being said, I think even though those were thoughts in our minds, we also went into this thinking, hey, whatever God wants, right? And so I think that ultimately, like, we just rested on that, and that, if God had designed this to be the moment that we were to conceive a child, then we'll let that plan play out the way that it needs to, and we'll figure it out. We would have found a way to make a baby work going to Poland. It would have worked somehow. Thankfully, it didn't. Like, we didn't make baby to Poland. But I think that's an element as well, is just how much of this are you willing to displace in God's hands as well, and that's not easy, right? So
yeah. Well, Jonathan, I like what you said kind of about how the media really puts a lot of emphasis on the wedding night and a lot of emphasis on the honeymoon. And it's like, oh, it has to be amazing. And it has to be all this great things. And you have to prepare for it. And you have to have the perfect lingerie, and you have to have, the perfect setting and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, you are getting married for the rest of your life. That one night doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be the night. And let's take the flip side of this. If you're charting and you're coming up on the wedding and you're realizing, oh yeah, I'm probably not going to be fertile. I'm probably going to be in that infertile time. Wonderful, but don't put too much pressure on yourself. Like this, speaking from experience, it's a little rough the first couple of times.
Yeah. I mean, I think for the both of us, we, thanks be to God, we had the grace to remain virgins until we were married. And so the whole physical intimacy, part of marriage was completely foreign to us. And so obviously there's a lot of, technical stuff that you're learning on the job, so to speak, right? And so that the magic that you're supposed to quote unquote experience, with your spouse on that night, it's probably not going to be that way, because no matter what your backgrounds are, it's two people coming from completely different, life experiences, joining as one. There's so many different foreign elements that you have to consider, even just like something as simple as being in bed with another person, right? For a lot of people, that's completely new, right? I never shared a bed with anybody, so to have somebody else tugging on the other side of the blanket was really weird to me. I didn't feel like I could fully sleep, and so that was an adjustment too, right? Was there anything else that you had to adjust to?
Well, I think even just talking about what that night was going to look like, or talking about how we were going to ease into, being intimate with one another. I mean, it's not easy to have those open and honest conversations, but they need to happen before you get married. Talking about what you're nervous about, what you're anxious about, what your fears are, what you're comfortable with, what you're not comfortable with. And so we tried to have those conversations, and they were ongoing even after that the time of our honeymoon.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. These deep conversations, about sexual intimacy and, things that are working, things that aren't working, fears that you're still having, discomfort, all of those kinds of things need to continue this isn't just like a one-time conversation, like right before you get married, like, oh, let's sit down and have the sex talk.
Yeah, the movies aren't doing us any favors, because it looks like, they just get it right away. But no, it's not like that in real life.
I mean, it's like a skill, like any skill. At first I mean,
no, I see where you're going. Like, at first you suck at it.
But you get, like together, like you get better at it. It's like you practice at it, and you just continue, you continue doing that, and eventually it just becomes, more magical than you even thought it could be, for the first time, right? So
absolutely. Yeah, I think that's so great. And I think just one other thing that I've been thinking of, like, of that wedding night, a lot of times you're exhausted after like just a couple of months of really high stress, like getting prepared for the wedding, and then the whole day long. And like, if you're anything like me, I didn't sleep the night before the wedding because like I had too many things going on in my mind, so it's like, it comes to like 10, 11 p.m., maybe 2 a.m., depending on the type of reception you have. And you're like getting into the hotel room, and it's like, I just want to go to sleep. That's all I want to do. I don't want to think about anything else. So keeping that kind of thing in mind, like, if you don't feel like it, you don't have to. This is not a requirement that you have to have sex on your wedding night. Yes, you do need to consummate your marriage, but that doesn't have to happen like that day.
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah, I had I just remember, towards the end of the night, like we're packing stuff, and there's just a lot of things that we had to like pack into the car. And I'm like, oh my gosh, there's like a whole other part of the wedding night that we still have to get to. This night is not even over. But I think also I was also running on adrenaline and excitement as well.
True.
Being around friends and family, and just kind of seeing how happy they were for us, and so for me, like personally, like I wouldn't have been able to like go to sleep right away. Of course I was physically tired, but I think I was just running on adrenaline. I think, I don't know, what about you?
Yeah, I was too, but I was also exhausted. I actually slept the next day as well throughout the day, even when we had guests over, and people were probably thinking like, oh, they had a long night. But for me, I've been stressed, you know,
she had a long month.
I had a long month.
Yeah.
And on top of that, I think I had just stopped my period and I had a thyroid condition that I didn't even know about. So even though my cycle is usually regular, you just never know what it's going to look like after all that stress.
Oh, yeah. The stress can just totally throw your cycle out of whack. Oh, man. Yeah. And we've talked about that on the podcast before, too. So if you go back in a couple of episodes where we kind of talk about stress and how that applies to the cycle, very interesting episodes. Okay, so I have some questions that I reached out to some friends of mine. I reached out to some listeners, some single women, some engaged women, some women who are dating, hoping to marry said person. And so I got some questions from them. And so I want to just kind of go through these questions. So the first one I have is it possible to plan your wedding on a night that you are not fertile that far in advance, since it can take months to plan a wedding?
No. Next question. I mean, you know, it's just a waste of your mental health, I think, trying to focus so much of your energy around that date. And because I mean, I'm not the perfect person to talk about this, but the women's body is like so complex, and and when you're just talking about stress, you add the stress of a wedding, that's going to throw things off for sure. So whatever your plans are, like to do that, I wouldn't I wouldn't expect things to go smoothly in that area. So,
yeah, I would totally agree. As we were just saying, like, stress can completely throw your cycle out of whack, and there's just no way that you can really plan for that effectively. All right, next question. Was it hard to talk to your spouse about having to abstain on the wedding night?
For me, it was not. It wasn't easy. It wasn't challenging. I think because we had been talking about sex long before that wedding night, because we were already charting. We had an NFP instructor, and she was very bold in talking about intimacy. So, she helped facilitate that conversation between us months before our wedding night. But I think the hard part probably was just being vulnerable and being open and honest about my thoughts about sex, any guilt or shame, or negative thoughts that I had about sex, growing up, because it was like, oh, don't do this, don't do that. But when you get married, you can. It was just the conversation wasn't very focused on the positives.
Right. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of women who fall into that same situation where it's sort of like all of a sudden when you get married, it's like a hard no turns into like a really big yes. And it's very hard to like change, like wrap your mind around that and change your thoughts about sex, because they've been so negative for so long. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, this is like a good thing that you're supposed to do all the time. And you're like, oh, what the heck?
Yeah. I think one of the things that comes to mind for me is, how important it is to consider that, your spouse or even yourself, could have been dealing with wounds, that, you're bringing into your marriage, whether it's a confidence thing, in the way that you look or whatever it is, or maybe, wounds from, God forbid, some sort of encounter in the past, that hurt you. And so I think talking and communicating those things to one another, I think really, well, of course, like it does be closer to one another, but it also helped us to affirm one another as well, because, I think one of the key things, like, to have a very like healthy sex life is when you can feel confident about bringing your best self, to the other person, because you're giving your whole self. And so to come to that person, feeling wounded and feeling like hurt, like you're not able to give, put your best foot forward, so to speak. And so being able to communicate those things and bounce those thoughts off of the other person, and have them, help, heal, not heal you, but just kind of help process these emotions and kind of journey alongside with you, I think is really important. So that way, when you guys do come together, it's, you're able to just be like fully open and fully just yourself.
Fully open and fully receptive to the other person.
Yes. Oh, that was beautifully said. Thank you for that. Okay, the next question is, what if I am, this is actually kind of what we were just talking about. What if I am scared about the wedding night because I am a virgin?
I think that's normal.
Yeah.
Yes.
To be scared.
Yeah. I think, I think it just comes back to the influence that society has, on us, and our perception of the wedding night and sex just in general. You just have to be honest with yourself. Like, this is something that you've never done before, so don't expect it to, to be good at it.
Yes.
Don't, if you've never played basketball before, don't expect to be, Michael Jordan,
Yeah.
So, just be patient with yourself and make sure you find somebody that's patient with you as well.
Yeah. And I think, again, like, especially if you are having fears about this, like, that communication aspect is going to be the most helpful thing, is talking to your future spouse about that, and about those fears that you have. And if those fears stem from something specific, or if it's just because, you've no idea what to expect. It's all normal. All of those feelings are normal. But talking about them, I think, is one of the best things that you can do.
Yeah. And I think also talking to the Lord about it.
Yes.
And talking to him first and foremost. And, perfect love casts out fear. So if, you have that intimate relationship with God and you can bring that to your spouse, then that helps you to feel less scared. Mm-hmm. Or not even less scared, but just despite that fear, love is more abundant than that fear.
And also I want to be careful with this, because, we don't want to downplay the fact that, I think this was mentioned before, that the fear could be stemming from some sort of trauma, in the past. And, obviously, those things are really serious. And, you and your future spouse, should obviously communicate those things, but also consider, some sort of therapy, as well, because if it's really that, traumatic, and if it really caused such a deep wound like that, then it's really worth exploring, some sort of professional help to kind of help process through that, and, have somebody else, a third party, to help, guide you through that healing process. So
yeah,
absolutely. That is such a good point. Yeah.
And what is fear too? It's that false evidence appearing real. So maybe what someone can do is to do some research on questions that they have. I mean, it's great that they're asking this question now.
I've never heard that acronym before. Did you make that up?
No, I didn't make that up. I don't know who to quote.
We made it up, everybody. Everybody listen. False evidence appearing real, Chichioco's.
Yes. So talk to a professional, talk to people who are experienced, talk to someone you trust, and hopefully that will help.
Yeah, definitely. Awesome. Okay. Next question. Ooh, this one's spicy. What kind of things are good to do on the wedding night if you are fertile, since it will be new navigating chastity in marriage?
Yeah.
Is this if someone is abstaining?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, because one option is just to have sex. But I believe this is I believe this is from the perspective of if you're abstaining, if you're trying to avoid a pregnancy.
Yeah, I mean, well,
you can cater to your other senses. Maybe have like a date night where you're cooking for one another, or you have like a bath with like aroma.
Is this in general or specifically around the time of like the honeymoon or something like that?
The question is specific to, it says the wedding night, but I'm thinking like wedding night and honeymoon maybe.
You can't go on a date on your wedding.
No, in your hotel room, make it like a date night.
Well, I mean,
yeah, like pop some champagne. I know what you're talking about. Like pop some champagne, or like take a bath together, or take a shower together, like those kinds of things.
Yeah. Klarissa really loves massages, so that that helps.
Yes.
Even just sitting in front of the TV and just holding hands and just cuddling, because we talked about being tired at the end of the night. Maybe all you want to do is just curl up on the couch together and just watch whatever until you guys fall asleep.
Maybe you want to pray and just talk to each other,
or you could just stare at each other naked. I'm just kidding. Sorry.
You know what? You were kind of joking, but like that is an option as well. Like just like marveling in the design that God has built in our bodies. Like you can do that now. Like you're married.
Yes. Yeah. It's weird. It's weird making those jokes, but then I'm like, oh, we're married. We can make that joke. It's fine.
Right. But that is actually an option.
Yeah, that's true.
Awesome. I love that. Do you have any other thoughts on like things to do?
I don't know. I think like for us, like it's always really nice when we can just look at each other, because we're so like tied to our phones and our devices and stuff. Like sometimes like at the end of the day, like the most intimate moments are just like us just looking each other in the eye and like conversing and communicating. And since we're talking specifically about like the wedding night, it could just be something simple as just like, so like, what did you think? How did it go? Like, oh yeah, I really love this, in the dinner. Oh, I didn't really like that appetizer. Find ways to communicate one another on the wedding night. And then, if you're on your honeymoon, and I'm sure you're someplace, exciting. So I'm sure there's tons of stuff that you could be doing that isn't sex, that's still like really enjoyable to do. So
right, like checking out whatever nightlife in the area that you're in, or like if you're at one of those resorts, like going and getting extra dessert, like
treat yourself, like maybe that's actually a good point. Maybe just getting room service or picking out on something.
Oh,
yeah.
And Ellen, I have a question for you, and you could take this out if you don't know it, but isn't there an acronym for spicy in
SPICE? Yes. Oh, but what it stands for, you know what? I'm gonna put that in the show notes. Yeah, I will. I can't remember, but I should, because I'm an instructor. But yeah, I'll put that in the show notes of SPICE is like an acronym for like how to connect with each other during the fertile time if you are abstaining at that time. But yeah, that will be in the show notes, whatever the heck that stands for. Awesome. And I think one other thing to mention about like things to do on the wedding night, if you're fertile and you're trying to abstain, is like definitely communicate about what's gonna like make you go too far. Like make sure that you're because like for some people, taking a bath together is like a wonderful way to be physically intimate without having sex. For other people, that will just put it way too far, and could lead to kind of unchastity or actually just lead to having sex, which wasn't your plan, but also might be God's plan. I don't know. He's got other things in his mind. So just communicating about, what's going to work. And then the other thing that I was thinking of, which again, we talk about this quite a bit on the podcast, but love languages is so helpful to know what your spouse's love language is and what yours is. And if you're trying to abstain then on that wedding night and that honeymoon, finding ways to be intimate with each other using you and your spouse's love languages, whatever those are. So I highly suggest, going to the 5 love languages, taking those quizzes, maybe reading the book together before you get married, and just kind of thinking about things in that light as well. And again, I'll put those links in the show notes to that as well.
Yeah, I think if I could just comment, it's also just interesting, because you talked about the 5 love languages that, what I found like personally is that, you go into marriage, knowing, okay, like this is how I show love and this is how I prefer to receive love. Those things also evolve too, and they change in marriage also.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's just really interesting that, that can just happen. There might be a season where, one love language is, you're drawn to, that you weren't drawn to before. You just kind of go through those different seasons of your marriage, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, that's really good to keep in mind. Yeah. Okay, so the last question that I have is so hard. So good luck with this question. I don't know how to answer it. How long did it take before it became normal to practice abstinence in marriage?
Wow. I mean, what is normal?
Yeah.
It's pretty relative to everyone. I think, I don't know. I think going back to what I mentioned before is like, there are seasons, and of your love, and, I think a good example is like when you have children, and so, if you have a rhythm and you're saying, okay, well, we kind of know what to expect during, her fertile period, and, we're going to abstain, and so you kind of get into that rhythm, but then that rhythm completely, those expectations and that rhythm completely changes once you bring like children into the equation, because, your schedule, your timing, just energy is like, turn on its head, and so what once felt normal is no longer the same.
Yeah, not to mention like the woman's cycle is like completely different after a baby.
There's that aspect, but also just even, something that I learned, and maybe this is kind of going on a tangent, but just something that I learned is like, for women, like having a baby and having that baby attached to you 24/7, like the last thing you want is your husband, trying to, touch you. It's like, I need space. And, so I think that's something like to consider, is like, there's going to be times where it's going to feel normal, but, circumstances of life will just kind of happen, and, you're going to have to readapt again,
Absolutely.
Yeah. There's going to be different chapters where you have to adjust and practice abstinence. But hopefully, I mean, the goal is to always be practicing chastity and to be always seeing the other person as a gift, to be loved and not to be used. So hopefully that helps in practicing abstinence and, avoiding those fertile windows if you need to do that, because then you just continue to see and practice love and charity for the other person, and just learn how to celebrate each other. Yeah. When it's hard, it's going to be hard to abstain.
Yeah. And, when it's uncomfortable, like really just, embrace the discomfort of it, because like, that's just part of like what makes your marriage so strong, is knowing that, okay, this isn't easy. This is really hard. And just communicating that, brings you a lot closer than, you would have been if you actually did have sex together. you know. And so I think just offering that discomfort, to God, and joining it with, Christ on the cross, it's just, I think that's really what brings that holiness into your marriage, is realizing, yes, we're married, and yes, we have the freedom to do this, but there's still this cross that we're called to carry with one another, and that's what will help us to be better spouses, and hopefully better parents, to our children.
Oh man, that's a great place to end. Just on that note, I think that's fantastic. Thank you guys so much for coming on the podcast, for sharing so intimately and honestly, and answering some of those questions. I hope that you enjoyed being here with us.
Yeah,
It was super fun.
Yeah, it was cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I wait for our kids to listen to this when they're older.
Right? I know. I'm just counting down the days until my daughter is like a preteen, and I'm like, hey, you should listen to this podcast that I started when you were a baby. Oh man. Well, thank you guys so much.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks so much for listening. If you are not already following us on Instagram, follow us at Charting Toward Intimacy. And please feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you guys with episode topic ideas, suggestions for guests, as well as just comments and feedback and general questions. Please feel free to reach out either on Instagram or chartingtowardintimacy@gmail.com. Links are, of course, in the show notes. And if you'd like to reach out to Jonathan and Klarissa, you have any questions, please send me an email or reach out to me on Instagram, and I will connect you with them. Until next time.